Welcome to Tangent Animation Training Tutorial 1.3, Transformation, which basically means moving, rotating, and scaling stuff. So the first thing that you need to know immediately, if you're coming from the background of another software such as Maya, is that Blender is a Z-up environment. So if I grab the manipulator here, Z, and pull it and move it up and down, that is the vertical. In Maya, that would be the y-axis. So it may take a little while for you to adapt to that new reflex, but I'm sure you'll be fine. So here in our default scene, we immediately see that we have manipulators to transform with. What I'm going to do is go down to the bottom here, and this is where the manipulators can be toggled on and off. If I turn them all on, the first one gives us access to translate, the second to rotate, the third to scale. If I have them all on, they can be manipulated independently of each other while all the manipulators are visible. So I'll just hit Control-Z to undo that operation. And I'm going to go back to just translate mode. So once again, quickly, Z is up, Y for all intents and purposes is sideways, X is forward and back, and you can see that we have our statistics up here in our information window, which we get by hitting N. Now, grabbing the manipulators is not necessarily the most efficient way to transform these objects. The tools can be accessed down here by clicking on the display of the manipulators. You can also click on them up here in the toolbar, which makes the manipulators disappear. You'll see that if you hover over the toolbar, it shows you what the hotkeys are. And the hotkeys are different from Maya. The hotkey for move is G, which means grab in Blender. So if I hit G and move the mouse, it will start moving the object around. Right now, it's just moving relative to the viewport. By the same token, if I hit R, I will get rotation relative to the viewport. You can see that all three rotate stats are highlighting in our channel display. And if I hit the S menu, that is scale in all directions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zero all of these out and set scale back to the default of 1. Now, a much less mouse click intensive way to move an object around is to use Blender's hotkey system. So I can hit G just to move in general, or I can hit GY and isolate to the y-axis. Similarly, GZ, GX. And I'm not even clicking the mouse button to do this. So once again, rotate freeform, or rotation in the z-axis, rotation in the y-axis, and rotation in the x-axis. When you're ready to confirm your operation, you can quite simply click the left mouse button, or you can hit Enter. And also, if you feel it hasn't gone well at all, you can just interrupt the operation and click the right mouse button, and it will go to its previous position. The default setting for transforming objects in Blender is always going to be in global space. So if I start doing a move with my hotkey like GZ, then enter a bit of rotation, and then do GZ again, I'm still moving in the global axis. If we want to move in local space, there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. We can either use the manipulator and flip it from the global menu down here to local and pull a manipulator. Notice if I just go back to G, it will move in global space again. But Blender hotkeys are what are called stackable. If I go G, Z, Z, it will flip from global to local. G, Y, Y, G, XX. So the additional keystroke takes it up to the next menu item. And this applies to all of the transforms. So if I just hit R, that's in global space. If I go RZZ, that is in local space. There are also other modes of transformation that you can flip to. Here I am in rotate mode. I can flip this not only to local, but also to, say, gimbal. So if we're using the gimbal rings here, just be cautious to give them enough space because they're pretty sensitive. So you want to grab it close to that little inner black line there. So we want to gimbal rotate in X, then in Y. You'll notice as I do my gimbal rotates, only one statistic updates at a time. Now we'll do X. So gimbal rotates are actually the information that will end up in the graph editor. So you want to be conscious of that, and you also want to be conscious of the fact that it is possible to get into gimbal lock, which can be a little unpleasant. We'll talk about how to avoid gimbal lock or how to solve it in one of the future animation units. Now, there is one additional thing worth noting about using the gimbal rotate tool, which is very important for animation and layout artists because gimbal rotate stats are what end up in your graph editor. We'd already discussed using the gimbal rings and the channel box to get to gimbal rotates, but is there a way to access them through the hotkey system without A, having to flip the tab, or B, grabbing the rings, or C, having to use the channel box directly? The answer is almost. So what we actually need to do is flip the menu to gimbal. What I'm immediately going to do is just enter 45 degrees of rotation into all of the rotates. So immediately if I just hit RY, that is updating all three rotate stats. So that is doing a global rotation. But since my menu is set to gimbal, if I go RYY, that will then jump to gimbal because that is what the menu is set to. So once again, this is pleasant because I can go RYY, and without clicking the mouse, I can do gimbal rotates in any axis, RXX, and you can see that only one stat is updating in the channel box. Now, this functionality does differ a little bit from if you're in global mode and hit RZZ. That will graduate you up one level to local mode. There is no way to graduate up the stream to gimbal. You actually have to be on the menu, which is slightly inconvenient. Another thing that is slightly inconvenient about the gimbal rotate tools is you often want to see how the rings are updating interactively to tell if you're going into gimbal lock or not. The only way to see that kind of interactivity is to scrub in the channel box. I would hope that one day that graphical error will be repaired. And once again, the specter of gimbal lock is something we will deal with in another unit. So once again, to quickly recap, if we want to rotate in gimbal without using the mouse, we go and flip this to the gimbal menu, enter your rotates by going RYY, stack them, RXX, and once again you can tell that you're effectively rotating in gimbal mode if only one of the channels is updating in the rotation channel box. And this is once again the information that goes to your graph editor, the gimbal rotation information. And just a quick note of caution, there is no hotkey combination that will actually flip these menu tabs for you. There are certain hotkey combinations. Once again, I can go into RZ, RY. These are global rotates. Even though the menu is clearly set to gimbal, the hotkeys override what this menu is saying and does not interactively update the menu. So just remember, hotkeys override what you are seeing in the orientation menu. So we'll flip this all back to 0. So another neat trick that you can perform with the Blender hotkeys, if I go to, say, the scale, if I go S and I hit Shift and then hit YZ, if I'm holding down Shift, the last axis I hit will be eliminated from the operation. Since I hit Z last, Z is not transforming, whereas the other two are. So I can simultaneously scale in two axes, the X and the Y, and preclude the Z. I'll undo that, so we will zero out our friend, and that is a basic overview of transforming objects in Blender.